You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford, Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mock,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Jerome Preisler on the show today. He has written the newest entry in Tom Clancy's NetForce series, Attack Protocol. And I'll tell you what, Jerome, since you relaunched the NetForce series, was it a year ago, I think? This is some of the best stuff coming out of the franchise at the moment. Welcome to the show.
Wow, thanks a lot. My pleasure to be here.
Jerome, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, I started writing when I was about 9 or 10, and it wasn't a conscious thought about wanting to be a writer. That really didn't occur to me till years and years later. But I started working on a novel, and I started handwriting it on loose leaf paper. Again, I was probably 10 or 11. And then at some point within the first few months, I started typing it. There was an old Royal typewriter in the room that I shared with my brother, and I believe it belonged to my mother, but to this day I'm not sure. So I started typing, and somehow or other I typed correctly. I wasn't finger pecking. One finger pecking. I was actually typing away with my fingers where they were supposed to be, and that novel grew into about 140 pages, single spaced. No margins, because I knew nothing about margins. In fact, I was using both. I used both sides of the paper, and when somebody yelled, this kind of dates it, but and dates me, but I would shift the ink so that I would have you used to have the double bands of typewriter ribbon,
right?
Black and red. I would shift to red, so when people were yelling, it would be red. No italics.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and that was really that was the first thing I did.
That's
and it was
amazing.
And it was almost automatic writing. I don't remember the act of writing it. I of course remember the story and being immersed in it, but the actual sitting there and typing for all those hours, I have no recollection of it.
Wow. Do you ever kind of find yourself in that state now, or are you always striving to get back to that place?
Mostly striving. The closest, yeah, desperately. It's nice that we're talking about Attack Protocol, because the closest I've come to that in all these years was the writing of Attack Protocol.
Wow, that's amazing. Jerome, you've written several entries in the Tom Clancy world. How did you get plugged into his world that he had created, and what was your entry there?
Well, it started back. It started back in the mid '90s. There was a nonfiction series that was coming out under his imprint. It was each book in the series was titled, named after a different branch of the service.
I remember those.
Yeah, and there was one called Airborne, and there was some issues getting it out, so I was asked to write certain sections of it, and I'm thanked in the credits, but I'm not credited as the writers. I did a few things in that, and then a few months later, a guy who should be a household name for people who love to read. His name was Marty Greenberg, or Martin H. Greenberg, who passed away a number of years ago. he was working with Tom on some of these co-created series, which were just being launched then, and Marty was also involved in that particular nonfiction series. He gave me a call out of the blue one day and said, Jerome, do you want to write the Power Play series? And I was, well, yeah, great. And he said, Tom's co-created it. We can send you a series Bible. You can confirm then. Yeah, okay. And then I find out that I think he called me up in something like, let's say, August, and the book was due in October. and of course, I can clearly remember Marty telling me the huge investment in this book and the publisher was making, and he said, there's going to be a lot on your shoulders, Jerome. And I thought, yeah, right. 2 months worth of sweat, but we got it done. And I wrote I think there were 8 books in that series, and that was really how it all started.
So, Jerome, how does one get to the place where you get called upon to rescue, or maybe not rescue, but to fill in some holes in a book that's in the Tom Clancy franchise in the beginning, and then get to go on to write the Power Play series? But how do you get to the point where you're called in to kind of help patch things up?
That's a great question. In my case, what happened was I had been doing, I'd done a number of books for Tom's publisher, which was Putnam Berkeley at the time. And so a couple of the editors had gotten to know me and liked my work. So when they were in a pinch, they asked me. The reason I say it's such a good question is I don't know how easily or how likely it would be for something like that to happen nowadays, because the stuff that I was writing at the time would be were your paperback originals. They weren't your A-list books. And nowadays, with mid-list books being cut, the entire mid-list disappearing, it would be really hard for there even to be a writer in that position at that point. So I don't know. I don't know if it could happen nowadays, and if it, and that would be really sad. But in my case, that was a position I was in.
So the Power Play series, I remember this series, and as a lover of the Clancy world, this was an obvious choice. But for the listeners who may not be familiar, what was the setup for that series, and what corner of the world did Power Plays fill?
The concept behind it was that there was a extremely wealthy businessman who was in communications, and he had these ground stations all over the world. Initially, he needed an armed force to kind of protect these bases, because essentially that's how it was structured. They were these quasi, I don't want to say military bases, but anyway, there was a lot of classified stuff going on there. So he needed a force. He had his own security force, and the idea would be that he would then get involved in all sorts of different international crises, and it was a difficult concept to work with, because obviously, let's just say he had, in one of the stories, he had a ground station in Brazil and they get attacked, or something happens in Brazil. Well, obviously, there are a whole slew of international laws that might ordinarily preclude his group from getting involved, and or at least place certain restrictions on them. So one initial restriction that we came up with was that he would use non-lethal, or more correctly, less than lethal weapons. And that kind of, as the series went on, that faded a bit, because I just found it difficult to have the good guys using less than lethal weapons against bad guys who are coming to wipe them out. It doesn't work that way. If in reality, if there's a conflict like that, the people who are using less than lethals are going to be at the bad end of that. So anyway, that was the concept, and it developed and morphed a bit as we went along, but started out being that.
You have written a number of books in the Tom Clancy universe. Also written some narrative nonfiction and historical works, as well as other novels. But Jerome, how does writing cutting edge fiction like you're doing here, and also writing narrative nonfiction historical works? One thing that I've noticed about your historical work is that you really have a penchant for bringing out characters and what's interesting about them and their plight. And we've all read history that's just rote facts over and and until you're just mind numb, and the same kind of thing in a lot of technical present day fiction. You can do the same thing. You can overwhelm people with facts, and unless there's a character tied to it that this impacts, we don't really care about it. What are your thoughts about creating characters and making them making the readers care about them and care about the journey that they're going on?
Well, my characters, they kind of evolve very organically. I think that's my strength. One of my main strengths as a writer. I'm good at characters, and I'm good at dialogue. So that's how I approach everything. I look at everything I write is character driven, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And I like series because you can really move a character along over a period of years and really have changes and growth. And these things, I don't plan it out. I may have a general idea where a character is going, but they kind of dictate to me what happens to them. As in terms of the kind of comparison between writing nonfiction and fiction, writing the Clancy type stuff, and a narrative history. The techniques I use are pretty close to identical. The kind of linchpins that you have if you're writing, and we'll use the Clancy books since we're talking about them as an example. With the Clancy book, you have there are two key things you need to nail, and one is that you need to really be factually accurate. Your research has to be meticulous. The other thing is that you want to tell a really entertaining, crackling story. That's exactly what I want to do with history. And so, in a way, I think the first of my narrative history was written after I'd written a number of Clancy books, and they were good preparation for me in terms of developing research techniques. I apply all those techniques and refine them in doing the nonfiction. And all of the nonfiction I do is narrative nonfiction, which is telling the story. I try to do it boots on the ground, so that the reader really experiences it as if they're reading a really good novel. And the key difference would be, if you're writing history, you obviously can't figure out a way for your hero to get out of a fix when he's in serious trouble. He either did get out of it or he didn't. If he didn't, well, nothing you can do. It's history. In fiction, obviously, you can make stuff up. So in that way, I guess it makes it a little bit easier. But short version of the answer is that working on one or the other, I take very much the same approach.
I remember when the original Net Force series came out. It would have been in the 90s. I don't remember the exact year. That original series created by Tom Clancy and Steve Pieczenik, if I remember right.
Yeah.
There were some concepts in those books that were very forward thinking. But if you look back on them today, they didn't necessarily age well.
Right.
And like some of the I remember it was maybe even the first book, some of the avatars and how they would be cars, on a literal highway in a virtual world. And when you started in the virtual world, I think you had a Dodge Neon, if I'm remembering right. There's some concepts that just didn't age well, but it was very forward thinking at the time. When you're reapproaching the Net Force series and looking at number one, technology has permeated our lives since that time and has become even more integrated into what we do. And the average reader is maybe a little more savvy just because of the permeance of just how it's everywhere. How do you start thinking of forward-looking technologies while
A hitman with a conscience. Ian Bragg is paid to kill people.
Have yourself dated
Only bad
in
people,
a couple
not
of
many.
decades?
But for
That's
a great deal of
question.
money.
And of course,
Case
you
the
don't know if
target.
that's going to happen
Make the
or not.
hit.
You can
Exactly.
only-
Move on.
Yeah, you can only
Until
keep
he
your
meets the
fingers
woman
crossed.
with sparkling
This
green
has
eyes
nothing
who
to do with
changes
technology,
everything.
But
A
one
few pre-readers
interesting,
had this to say about
one
Ian
interesting thing
Bragg.
that I'm
Mark
looking at
Dawson,
in terms of as a
million-selling
novelist,
thriller author,
that
says a
every novelist
rip-roaring
right now
ride
must
from
be
start to
thinking
breathless
about is,
finish. Craig
are
Martell
your
hit a home
characters-
run
if
with the
story
operator.
is in my
The
case,
taut,
I have
lean
Net Force.
prose and lightning
The current
fast
Net
pace
Force series is
make
set.
this a page turner
The
without
first book is in
sacrificing an ounce
2023, and I'm now
of
up to
story or depth.
2024.
You'll find yourself
Are people
rooting
gonna
for the
be wearing
hitman
masks?
main
Well,
character
when I wrote
as
Net
he
Force,
faces the toughest
as-
decision of his
because of the
career.
pandemic,
The Operator is the start of a new
we
thriller
don't-
series
we don't
I
know.
expect to see
You know, we
burning
may
up
think so, we
bestseller
may
list
think
for
not.
years to
We
come,
don't know
says
exactly
A.C. Fuller,
how-
author of
you
the
know, we know
Crime
there's a
Beat
vaccine
and
that
Alex Vane
hopefully is
media
around then,
thrillers.
but what
Suave, romantic, and
none
lethal,
of us
Ian
know.
Bragg is everything
So
you
when I
want in a
started
highly
writing,
paid assassin. Can't
when I
wait to
wrote
ride
the
this
first
train,
Net Force
says
book,
James Blatch,
it was
self-publishing
pre-pandemic.
formula.
Nobody's wearing masks. There's
It's
no
been a
mention
long
of the
time since I
pandemic.
fell this hard
Now
in
I'm
love with a
writing,
book,
I
a very
jumped ahead
long
and I'm
time.
writing a tax
Author of Women of
protocol, and
Wine
I'm
County
in the
romantic
midst- we're in the
suspense,
midst of
Terry
the
Wells
pandemic,
Brown
and
says.
it's highly
Grab this book from Craig
it's
Martell,
a big
The
influence
Operator.
on my thinking, the way what I'm feeling at the time, and of course I have to
Barrels
then kind of
Publishing
look
is the
back on, well,
brainchild
now,
of
how do
successful
we deal
indie
with it?
author James P. Sumner.
Getting to
He
technology.
has self-published over 15 titles in the last 5 years and has over 800,000 downloads so far in his
started
career,
discussions about
meaning he
rebooting
has a
Net
wealth
Force-
of knowledge and
Net
experience to
Force,
share
one of
with
the
the indie
things
publishing
that
community.
I knew
Knowing
was
the
that we
struggles
had
of the
to
modern
kind
day
of,
indie author as well as he
really
does,
look at
he wanted to
look
create a
at the
platform
whole
that would allow
concept of the
writers of
reboot.
any level to
And
learn the
I
ropes,
think
navigate
that
the pitfalls, and
timing was
produce a
great because,
professional novel without wasting
nowadays
time
with
or money in the
80
process.
different
Both
Batman
Barrels Publishing
reboots
is the
and James
perfect
Bond
one-stop
reboots,
shop for
people-
any indie
general
author, combining
readers and
James's
people
expertise
who
with his own
go to
team of
movies
editors and
get what a
designers so
reboot
you can
is.
help your
Sure.
novel realize
Whereas
its full
a few
potential
years
and learn
ago,
how to publish
maybe
yourself.
even 5 years
The
ago,
purpose of both
that
Barrels Publishing is to help
it
indie
wasn't
authors
as
get their
prevalent.
novels
It wasn't-
ready for
it wasn't as-
publication without all
it
the
wasn't
stress,
out there as much.
hassle, and
So it gave me
unnecessary
the opportunity
expense.
to say, look,
We want to
Net
make your
Force,
lives easier, which is why
because of all
we're
the
giving
things
you
just
access to a
articulated, which is
top-notch
that,
team
yeah, it was really
to publish
forward-thinking back
your novels,
in the 90s,
along with a
but,
generous discount
not
on their
everything happened
services.
the way
You can
they-
also work
the way
one-on-one
the writers at
with
the
James
time
to learn the
thought it was gonna
intricacies
happen. I
of
think what we need to
self-publishing.
do is
No hidden
reinvent the
cost,
whole thing.
no false
Just have a-
promises.
just
We
break with
simply
it.
want you to
Take
publish
what
the
might
best
be
version of your novel.
that
Both
the
barrelspublishing.com.
aspect of it, which is, we want to be as cutting edge as possible, and they were cutting edge, but it has to be from a modern perspective. So that's what I did. I can play. I like to play with expectations a bit. So I have a couple of the characters that were in the original series who do transfer into the new series, but they're completely different. The very nice, pleasant guys kind of, rather unpleasant, and they're really updated versions of it. And again, people get that. They've seen 5 different versions of Commissioner Gordon and Batman. But as far as the technology, what you have to really do is just you just have to really do your research and kind of look ahead. Look, if there's something going on now, you have to try to research what you have to look at the projections and look at what the likely evolution of it's going to be in the next 5 or 10 years. And there's no formula. There's no guarantee you're going to be right, but you do your best. Imagine all these science fiction writers, that.
Oh yeah.
Same thing.
Absolutely. So living in the 21st century, the idea that we would fight another war, like World War II, is kind of a slim possibility at this point. And I think we all concede the fact that a lot of warfare now takes place in the digital realm, there are ways that war is maybe waged every day on a technological front that we aren't aware of. What's the big idea behind NetForce? Is it that there's a team of people that are ready, that are digital warriors in a sense? Is that kind of the big idea behind NetForce?
That's part of it. When I reimagined NetForce, I thought of a number of things. First of all, I thought it gets kind of boring if it's a bunch of people who are sitting typing at computer keyboards, or even using Alexa. They can't just be sitting there doing that stuff. So the whole so for me, and actually part of the original series was that there were different. There was a military as arm to NetForce. There was a cyber arm to it. So that really is the same. But what I did was I made it a Homeland Security type branch. It was a cabinet level branch of the government, whereas I think before in the original series it was part of the FBI, if I'm not mistaken. Another thing that was important to me was that because when we're dealing with cyberspace, and we're kind of going beyond, almost by definition there, national boundaries. I wanted my group of heroes to be representative of the world, of global society. So I very consciously populated with heroes of different nationalities, different ethnicities, different faiths, even different sexual orientations. I wanted to have my heroes represent modern society, and I think that's a real key aspect of this series, and it's it plays out really well because I think it allows me to really to open up the perspective of NetForce. So even though, yeah, it's an American base group, and again, it's on par with Homeland Security. My heroes are a rather interesting bunch of people, and there's a group that really focuses on the cyberspace elements of it. There's a group that focuses on the military or special ops aspect of the story, and then there's an investigative group, and so I have a really broad range. I can focus on certain characters in some stories, other characters in a different book or a different novella, because we're doing e-novellas between the books, and yeah, that's how I approach it.
When you start thinking of a new NetForce book, what's the first idea that comes to you? Is it a particular technology? Is it a geopolitical situation that you envision? Is it one of your characters and and what they might be getting up to. Where does that story idea begin?
My first thought was again, it was a character, and it was one of the central characters is named Kali Alcazar. The name, the character came to me whole, and she was is a black hat hacker, or really, no, let me correct that. She's a gray hat hacker, which is someone who hacks according to her own moral code, and that moral code may or may not sync up with international law. But she's coming from a place of real moral strength, and we find out a lot about Ali and her background as the series goes on. So I decided that when we open the story, Kali's not part of any group. Kali is hacking into a corrupt bank. That was the first image I had, and from there, I just started to think, well, how do we pull Kali into NetForce? Who are the people that do that? Where is Kali when this happens? What's been happening with her before that? And so the next thing that came into my mind was, okay, she's being pursued by somebody, by some Americans who capture her. And that's where she first starts working with America and Americans. Well, who are these Americans? So I came up with a CIA hunter tracker team, and they'd been pursuing her when NetForce Dark Web, the first book, opens. They've caught up to her, and they've been after her for months. And I start thinking about who those characters are, and because it's an origin story, NetForce does not exist at the beginning of book one. So all people become part of NetForce, network. But they become part of NetForce by the end of book one, and then into book two. So the story kind of, the origin story is kind of spills over even a little bit into book two, but that's really where it started out. And then kind of imagining what roles will these characters have? What other characters will I need? And it's just building blocks. You start building around them. But really, front and center in the series is this character, Kali, and the CIA guy, Mike Carmody, who leads that tracks her down.
Jerome, you mentioned earlier the idea of masks and the pandemic and what we're dealing with in the world right now, and what would that look like in your fiction going forward? What would the reality of the world look like in a couple of years? Because these books are a couple to a few years in the future. Besides the masks and the pandemic, what are some of the pieces of technology that you've gotten to play with and sort of envision what path it might take?
Well, in Attack Protocol, I really had a lot of fun playing with the idea of AI, especially in robots and drone swarms. Of course, the most obvious things are cyberspace, virtual realities plays into the series. Sort of this, mobile VR, the evolution of rather than have virtual reality spaces within even, say, earlier on, when I first conceived the series, I thought of something called the Hive, which was a physical place where some of my characters would put on virtual reality headsets, and it was really, and then they would have, kind of different virtual reality experiences that allowed them to analyze certain things. That grew into the Hive being having no physical space, so that people plug into the Hive using using these headsets that obviously are Wi-Fi connected, so you don't have to have a computer, and they're completely mobile. That's the easy thing. But I thought what I've really had a lot of fun with, as I mentioned, was kind of looking at AI within robots, and in the case of this story, it was sentry or military robots, and then kind of extrapolating, thinking about, okay, what happens when people start messing with that AI, and what are the safeguards that that need to be in place if we're going to have those sorts of contraptions running around, and what happens if there are holes in the safeguard, in those safeguards. The other thing that, of course, really plays into the whole series is the Internet of Things. Everything is plugged in.
Right.
So, and most things nowadays, and really, as far as I can see into the future, really don't have adequate protection, adequate firewalls. So, you can start looking at cyber attacks in terms of how does a computer bug spread? And nowadays, it can spread from your smart refrigerator to your smart pen to your, to everything. So in book one, in Dark Web, I actually thought about that, because that's really what happened. And I did a lot of research into how a biological epidemic, ironically, would spread throughout civilizations. And I looked back, I read a lot of stuff about how, polio and tuberculosis and how all of those diseases, Black Plague, and I looked at routes of contagion. And I then transferred that into technology and started looking at, okay, what are the parallels? And the parallels were tremendous. I mean, they were really evident, and they were all over the place. So I then really imagined, well, okay, now I've got this bug. How's it going to spread? And I used these models of how biological epidemics had spread to kind of model out how my fictional computer bug would spread. And again, I use the Internet of Things, because that to me is, and that to the that's scary to me, and it's actually scary to all these computer experts out there. I speak to people in the FBI. I spoke to people who are designing different sorts of firewall software, and the number one thing that they all worry about is near field technology. And for people who aren't really acquainted with the term, it's just when you go to Starbucks and you swipe your phone to you hold your phone against the scanner. There are a lot of vulnerabilities in that technology, and yet that's becoming more and more prevalent. Nobody's using cards, nobody's using cash, and so that's something I've thought about a lot and used in the series.
Well, as always, a NetForce book is a great way to think about the issues that we're dealing with today, and couch them in visions of the future, and what a great way to do that. The new book is called NetForce Attack Protocol. When you're hearing this, it's on sale everywhere, and you can grab your either hardcover or Kindle edition or audiobook, however you love to read those. We're going to put links to it in the show notes of this episode. Jerome, if people are just learning about you and all of the fantastic stuff that you're involved with, is there a place where they can connect with you online?
Well, I have a Facebook page. You can always connect with me there. I also have my website, JeromePreisler.com, and anybody can email me there. I love hearing from people and love to get back to readers.
Excellent. We're going to send everyone to see you. NetForce Attack Protocol be today. Jerome, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
On an isolated human planet called Phoenix, outside the Galactic Gate Network, A royal empire teeters on the brink of revolution. The new emperor is weak, the old guard seeks power, and a hidden slave cabal manipulates the great and small houses alike. None of this concerns Simeon Brezhnev, newly appointed steward to one of the most powerful heiresses on the planet. Happy to let the royals play their age-old game of catch the crown, Simeon is more concerned with balancing his mistress's books than worrying about affairs of state. But when Simeon discovers evidence of sedition at the highest levels of government buried deep within her finances, he realizes her great peril. Though a slave, he finds himself trapped in political intrigue, desperate to protect his mistress from the royals who would see her dead and the slave rebels who would make her their pawn. Agonized by the choice of turning her over to the authorities or protecting her secrets, Simeon decides to keep faith with his sovereign over his larger duty, thus flinging himself into a world of power, plot, and assassination. If he fails, they both die, and with them the chance at freedom for Simeon's enslaved race. Set in the Salvage title universe, Salvage Mind is the first of 3 novels in a new breakout series. Available in ebook format and paperback, grab your copy today. Salvage Mind by David Allen Jones. Bone Thief, John Driscoll, Book 1 by Thomas O'Callaghan. A sociopathic killer is using the internet to lure seemingly random women to their gruesome deaths in New York City. During his heinous murder spree, this madman is extracting the bones of his victims. His sheer brutality has the residents of the Big Apple in panic mode. Who is this twisted psycho who's abducted a housewife in broad daylight only to dispose of her lifeless body alongside a lake in Prospect Park, nailed the boneless remains of a nameless drifter to the underside of a boardwalk at Rockaway Beach, allowed the gutted corpse of a single parent to wash ashore under the Brooklyn Bridge, and has had the audacity to leave the desecrated body of the Magnolia Tea heiress rotting atop trash at one of the city's sanitation dumps. NYPD's top cop, Homicide Commander John W. Driscoll, has never witnessed such savagery. Hammered daily by the district attorney, the mayor, and the police commissioner, the lieutenant, who's battling his own inner demons, must use every resource available to put an end to the killings. In a race against time, Driscoll, aided by Sergeant Allegante and Detective Cedric Tomlinson, sets out on a roller coaster of an investigation to first identify the villainous fiend and then put an end to his butchering. Grab Bone Thief by Thomas O'Callaghan now.